The congressional chamber was tense from the start. Pam Bondi entered with the confidence of someone who believed she could control the narrative, armed with sharp remarks and dismissive glances. She had made a career out of projecting strength, but this time, she wasn't ready for what Jasmine Crockett had in store. Representative Jasmine Crockett, calm and composed, sat with a thick binder stacked in front of her. The cameras panned in as whispers spread through the room. When it was her turn to speak, Crockett leaned forward, voice steady but razor sharp. "Pam, I think the American people deserve the truth. And today, I've brought the documents that make it impossible for you to hide behind soundbites." She opened the binder and slid copies across the desk. Staffers scrambled to deliver them down the row as Bondi shifted uncomfortably in her chair. The room erupted with murmurs, reporters flipping pages, members of Congress leaning closer to see. "These records show exactly what you denied," Crockett continued, her tone unwavering. "It's all here in black and white, dates, signatures, financial trails, and the very emails you claimed never existed." Bondi tried to interject. "That's a mischaracterization, Representative." But Crockett cut her off, holding up a highlighted page for the cameras. "Mischaracterization? This is your own correspondence. These are your own signed approvals. You can't run from paper. And you can't spin what's right here in front of America." The silence that followed was deafening. Even Bondi's allies avoided eye contact. A single camera flash went off, capturing her pale expression as the weight of the evidence settled in. Finally, Bondi rose from her chair, clutching her notes. Her voice faltered as she muttered something about unfair procedures. Then, in front of millions watching live, she turned and walked out, her heels clicking against the floor as Crockett sat calmly, almost smiling. The chamber buzzed in disbelief. Crockett didn't gloat, didn't raise her voice, she simply leaned back in her chair and tapped the binder. The message was clear: when the truth is this undeniable, you don't need to yell. You just need to show the receipts. Within minutes, the clip went viral online. Headlines blasted across news sites: "Pam Bondi walks out after Jasmine Crockett drops documents." Social media flooded with reactions, praising Crockett for holding her ground with undeniable proof. For Pam Bondi, the moment was a collapse of authority. For Jasmine Crockett, it was a defining victory, one that would be replayed for weeks as a reminder of what happens when confidence meets cold, hard evidence. The moment Bondi stormed out, the committee chamber broke into chaos. Some lawmakers tried to cover for her, others looked stunned, and reporters rushed to file their stories. Cameras stayed glued to Crockett, waiting for her next move. But Jasmine didn't chase the spectacle. Instead, she calmly adjusted her glasses, opened the binder again, and spoke directly into the microphone. "For the record," she said, her voice steady, "these documents will be entered into the committee's official archive. No one should mistake silence or a walkout as victory. The facts remain, and the American people deserve transparency." The words hit hard. It wasn't just about exposing Bondi, it was about making it clear that no one could simply dodge accountability by leaving the room. In the back, a few of Bondi's allies whispered frantically, trying to decide how to respond. But with the documents already in the record, they had no ground to stand on. One member leaned back, visibly frustrated, while another scribbled notes nervously. Outside the chamber, the press swarmed Bondi as she tried to exit the building. "Why did you leave? Do you dispute the documents? Will you issue a response?" The questions fired rapidly, but Bondi's only answer was silence as she pushed through the crowd. Inside, Crockett continued. She flipped to another page, holding it up so the cameras could zoom in. "This isn't about party lines. This is about truth. And truth doesn't run out the door when it's confronted, it stands its ground." The room erupted in applause from the audience section, a rare break in congressional decorum. Even some of Crockett's opponents seemed unable to ignore the precision of her evidence. It was no longer just a political clash, it was a turning point. The headlines were already forming: Bondi flees. Crockett holds the floor. The documents speak for themselves. By the time Bondi had vanished from the chamber, the atmosphere shifted completely. The power dynamic had flipped, and everyone knew it. For once, it wasn't about fiery rhetoric or staged soundbites, it was about cold, undeniable evidence. Crockett leaned back slightly, allowing the silence to linger before turning to the chair of the committee. "I move that these documents not only be entered into the official record," she said firmly, "but that immediate review and investigation be scheduled. If public officials are willing to walk away rather than defend their actions, it's our duty to uncover why." The chair hesitated, glancing at colleagues who were visibly unsettled. "The motion is duly noted," he said, trying to maintain order, though the weight of Crockett's words hung over the entire room. Meanwhile, social media outside the chamber was exploding. Clips of Bondi storming out were spreading like wildfire, accompanied by captions like, "She couldn't handle the truth," and, "Crockett's receipts just ended this debate." News channels cut into live broadcasts, showing the dramatic exit on loop. Back inside, Crockett wasn't finished. She opened another section of the binder. "For transparency, I'll read aloud key portions that the public must hear," she announced. Her voice carried with absolute clarity as she quoted line after line, official approvals, email chains, signatures that tied Bondi directly to the very contradictions she had denied only hours earlier. Each word struck like a hammer, and members of the committee shifted uneasily in their seats. One ally of Bondi finally broke in, his voice trembling with forced confidence, "Representative Crockett, this is political theater." Crockett turned slowly, fixing him with a calm, piercing look. "No," she replied. "This is accountability. Theater is walking out when the truth arrives." The room erupted again, not with chaos, but with a collective acknowledgement that the tide had shifted beyond repair. Bondi wasn't just out of the chamber. She was out of moves. Outside the chamber, the chaos only grew louder. Reporters filled the air with questions as clips of Bondi's dramatic walkout went viral within minutes. Every major network cut into their regular programming to show the moment on repeat. Inside, Crockett stayed calm, almost surgical in her delivery. She continued reading from the documents, carefully explaining the trail of inconsistencies and pointing out how each page connected. There was no shouting, no insults, just facts laid bare for the cameras. On the other side of the aisle, Bondi's allies scrambled to salvage the situation. One attempted a procedural motion to adjourn, hoping to halt the spectacle before it grew worse. But the chair hesitated, the public was already watching, and shutting it down would only feed the narrative that something was being covered up. Meanwhile, social media was merciless. Hashtags like #BondiRuns and #CrockettReceipts trended at lightning speed. Memes flooded the internet, Bondi sprinting from the chamber, Crockett calmly flipping pages with captions like, "Facts don't flee." Crockett finally paused, closing the binder with a measured tap. "Let me be clear," she said, locking eyes with the cameras. "This isn't about humiliating anyone. It's about integrity. If someone entrusted with power cannot defend their record, the people deserve to know why." That line instantly became the quote of the day. News anchors replayed it within minutes, framing it as the moment Crockett not only dismantled Bondi's argument but also defined herself as a voice of unshakable authority. By the time the session adjourned, the story was unstoppable. Bondi hadn't just lost the exchange, she had handed Crockett a victory that would live far beyond the walls of Congress. Behind closed doors, the fallout hit Pam Bondi's camp like a storm. Advisors huddled around phones, scrolling through headlines that painted her as running scared and crumbling under Crockett's evidence. No spin strategy seemed strong enough to counter the image of her walking out on live television. Bondi herself was reportedly furious. Pacing the room, she snapped at aides for allowing the documents to surface without warning. But deep down, she knew the real damage came not from the papers themselves, but from the optics of her retreat. Meanwhile, Jasmine Crockett was unfazed. When approached by reporters in the hallway, she delivered a measured response, I didn't come here to play games. I came here to show the truth. If that truth makes someone uncomfortable, that's on them, not me." The quote spread like wildfire, replayed on every major network and clipped across platforms. Commentators quickly labeled it the line that sealed the day. By evening, panel discussions on cable news were unanimous. Crockett had scored a defining victory, while Bondi had handed her critics a visual they could weaponize endlessly. Editorials blasted Bondi's exit as the political equivalent of throwing in the towel. What made the moment even more devastating was how Crockett handled it. She didn't gloat, she didn't chase the cameras, she simply let the documents and Bondi's actions speak for themselves. That restraint only amplified the perception of her credibility. As the night went on, hashtags like #BondiWalkout and #CrockettExposedItAll climbed to the top of trending lists. Even late-night talk shows teased the footage, with comedians joking that Bondi set a new record for the fastest congressional exit. For Jasmine Crockett, the day had become more than just a hearing. It was a turning point, an undeniable moment where facts triumphed over bluster, and a single binder reshaped the narrative in front of the entire nation. The next morning, the media frenzy was unstoppable. Major newspapers ran front-page headlines with bold letters: "Crockett drops documents, Bondi bolts." Editorial columns framed the moment as not just a clash between two figures, but as a larger symbol of accountability versus evasion. On television, political analysts replayed the clip again and again. "You can't underestimate the visual," one commentator said. The binder on the desk, Crockett's calm tone, and Bondi literally leaving the room, its devastating optics. Crockett, meanwhile, went about her day as though nothing extraordinary had happened. When pressed by reporters outside her office, she simply said, "My job is to represent the people. If that means bringing forward uncomfortable truths, I won't hesitate." Her calm demeanor only added to her rising image as a figure who could stand firm under fire. In contrast, Bondi's silence became its own story. She declined interviews, avoided press conferences, and released only a short written statement calling the hearing politically motivated. But by then, the damage was sealed. The internet was filled with side-by-side comparisons, Crockett confidently holding evidence versus Bondi walking out mid-session. Social media users began creating slogans: "Receipts don't run, truth stays seated," and "Crockett won, Bondi 0." Influencers, commentators, and even comedians weighed in, making it impossible for Bondi's team to shift the narrative. By evening, Crockett's name was trending higher than some presidential candidates. She was being hailed not just as a sharp representative, but as a rising national voice. Some pundits even speculated this moment would mark the beginning of a much bigger political future for her. The storyline was clear: Crockett hadn't just won an exchange, she had owned the entire news cycle. And for Pam Bondi, the humiliation was only deepening with every hour of silence. As the story rippled outward, the impact stretched far beyond the committee chamber. Legal experts were brought onto primetime panels, each dissecting the documents Crockett had unveiled. One constitutional lawyer remarked, "It's not just that Bondi walked out, it's that the evidence was airtight." Once the binder hit the desk, there was no escape route. Bondi's allies tried damage control, but every attempt backfired. A former colleague went on air to defend her, insisting she left to protest unfair treatment. But the host quickly cut him off, replaying the footage of Crockett reading directly from Bondi's signed approvals. The clip spoke louder than any excuse. Meanwhile, Crockett's approach continued to earn praise. Instead of doing victory laps, she stayed on message, emphasizing transparency and integrity. "It's not about personalities," she told one reporter. "It's about accountability." That line struck a chord with the public, who saw her as both firm and principled. Late-night comedians piled on, joking that Bondi ran faster than a sprinter hearing the starting gun. Memes showed Crockett calmly flipping pages while Bondi blurred out the door. The narrative was no longer political commentary, it was cultural. Everyone had seen it, everyone had an opinion, and almost no one was siding with Bondi. Inside Bondi's circle, panic grew. Donors called for explanations, allies demanded clarity, and staffers quietly questioned whether their boss could recover from such a public collapse. One insider leaked to a journalist, "The walkout wasn't planned." She froze, then bolted. "Now we're left cleaning up what can't be cleaned." By now, Crockett's stature was undeniable. She wasn't just a congresswoman exposing a contradiction, she was the face of a moment that symbolized standing firm when confronted with the truth. And every replay of Bondi's hasty exit only made Crockett's calm strength shine brighter. By the end of the week, the fallout could be measured in numbers. Polls began surfacing, and the results were brutal for Bondi. Public approval ratings plummeted as words like untrustworthy and evasive dominated the responses. Meanwhile, Crockett's recognition surged. People who had never followed congressional hearings suddenly knew her name. On talk radio, callers lit up the lines. "She didn't yell, she didn't play games," one listener said. "She just showed the papers and let the truth do the talking. That's leadership." Another added, "Bondi ran from accountability, and everyone saw it." In editorial boards across the country, op-eds poured in. The New York Times called Crockett's move a masterclass in discipline and preparation, while the Washington Post described Bondi's exit as a textbook case of what not to do under scrutiny. Even international outlets replayed the footage, with headlines overseas mocking the spectacle. Crockett, however, refused to bask in the spotlight. When asked if she felt vindicated, she replied, "This isn't about me. It's about making sure no one is above answering to the people they serve." Her refusal to claim personal victory only elevated her credibility. Bondi's silence, in contrast, became deafening. Rumors swirled that her team was preparing a legal counterattack, but nothing materialized. Every day she stayed quiet, the narrative hardened. Crockett was the truth-teller, and Bondi was the politician who ran. Clips of the hearing were now stitched into viral montages, slow-motion shots of Bondi walking out, paired with Crockett's line, "Theater is walking out when the truth arrives." That phrase had become a rallying cry online, plastered across shirts, mugs, and trending hashtags. It was clear the story wasn't fading. It was growing, shaping both women's political futures in real time, and for Bondi, the cracks were beginning to look permanent. As the pressure mounted, Bondi's allies began to fracture. What had started as whispers behind closed doors quickly spilled into the open. A longtime supporter gave an anonymous quote to a major outlet, "We can't defend a walkout when the evidence is sitting on the desk for the world to see." Within days, smaller donors quietly pulled back, and larger political figures stopped mentioning Bondi in their speeches. It was a classic political distancing act, slow, deliberate, but unmistakable. Meanwhile, Crockett's stature only climbed higher. Grassroots organizations seized on the moment, praising her as a representative who refused to be intimidated. "This is what courage looks like in Congress," one advocacy group declared in a viral post. Inside the Capitol, staffers described a noticeable shift. Where Bondi once commanded the floor with confidence, she now avoided long exchanges. Some reported she entered hearings late and left quickly, dodging cameras at every turn. The once unshakable figure was now visibly rattled. Crockett, by contrast, grew more commanding. Colleagues, even some across the aisle, privately admitted they respected how she handled the confrontation. "She didn't grandstand," one remarked. "She brought the facts, stayed calm, and let the truth work on its own." On the evening news, panelists debated whether Bondi's career had taken a permanent hit. "This wasn't just a bad day," one analyst argued. "This was a moment that defines how the public sees her, and that image is of someone running from the truth." As the clip continued to dominate coverage, Bondi's own silence became a liability. Without a strong counter-narrative, the story was solidifying. Crockett was the victor, and Bondi was the politician who crumbled under pressure. The question wasn't if Bondi could recover. It was whether she'd even try. By now, the hearing had transformed into a national flashpoint. What began as a single exchange inside the committee room had snowballed into a defining political narrative. Everywhere, from cable news to late-night shows, from newspapers to social media, Crockett's calm authority was the headline. Bondi, on the other hand, faced a nightmare from within her own camp. Senior figures began to whisper that she should step back for a while to avoid dragging the entire block into further embarrassment. The calls weren't official, but they were loud enough to make their way into the press. One insider revealed, "The donors are restless. They don't want to keep explaining away that clip. Every time it plays, it undoes weeks of messaging." The blunt truth was impossible to ignore. Bondi wasn't just losing credibility, she was becoming a liability. Meanwhile, Crockett's rise was undeniable. Invitations poured in from major networks for exclusive interviews. Editorials praised her restraint and her reliance on documents rather than theatrics. One columnist wrote, "In an era of sound bites, Crockett showed the power of substance." She didn't need to shout. She needed only the truth. Public support swelled. At town halls, voters referenced her line, "Theater is walking out when the truth arrives." That phrase had crossed from politics into pop culture, symbolizing strength in the face of evasion. Bondi's silence continued to stretch. Her team drafted statements, rehearsed counterarguments, even considered a full-scale press conference. But every draft collapsed under the same problem: the documents existed, and Crockett had made sure the world had seen them. By the end of the week, the political world was forced to admit the obvious. Crockett had emerged stronger than ever, while Bondi's once solid image was slipping through her fingers. The ripple effects of the showdown were now undeniable. Crockett wasn't just trending for a day or two, she was dominating the conversation week after week. Analysts began describing her as a rising national figure, while headlines called her the new face of congressional accountability. Bondi, meanwhile, was trapped in political quicksand. Every attempt at damage control only made things worse. A leaked memo from her own team revealed frustration and infighting. "We cannot outspin video evidence. The optics are permanent." That line, once published, became yet another headline. Inside Congress, the power shift was visible. Crockett's colleagues sought her out for collaboration, sensing momentum. Even skeptics privately admitted that she had done what many never could, disarmed an opponent with calm precision and let the facts do the heavy lifting. Bondi's presence, in contrast, grew smaller. Where she once commanded attention, she now kept her head down, her interactions brief. The fear of another viral collapse hung over her every move. On social media, Crockett's quotes continued to dominate. One in particular, "Truth doesn't run out the door, it stays seated," was shared millions of times, stitched into speeches, and even printed on protest signs. It had become bigger than the hearing itself. Pundits speculated that Crockett's viral moment could open doors far beyond her current position. Some floated her as a future committee chair, others as a potential national contender. One commentator summed it up bluntly: Crockett turned a hearing into a career-defining moment. Bondi turned the same hearing into an exit strategy. The story was no longer just about what happened that day, it was about what it set in motion. For Crockett, it was the beginning of a larger trajectory. For Bondi, it was the slow unraveling of a career. As the weeks passed, the confrontation's impact widened beyond the two women at its center. Crockett's name was now woven into national conversations, not just as a congresswoman but as a symbol of fearlessness in the face of evasion. Political organizations highlighted her as proof that preparation and persistence could topple even the most polished figures. Bondi, however, was losing ground at a rapid pace. Calls for her resignation began surfacing, not just from critics, but from members of her own party who feared she had become a long-term liability. A few bold voices went on record: "Her credibility is gone. She can't continue to lead when the public sees her as someone who ran from accountability." News networks filled their primetime segments with comparisons. Side-by-side images told the story: Crockett seated, binder in hand, steady and unflinching, Bondi storming out, head down, avoiding cameras. Those images became the shorthand of the entire saga. Crockett, meanwhile, remained careful in her public statements. When asked about the growing calls for Bondi to step aside, she didn't gloat. "That's not my decision," she said firmly. "What I care about is making sure the truth is always front and center." Her refusal to play into the drama only deepened respect for her measured approach. Behind the scenes, the pressure on Bondi's camp was immense. Donors were withdrawing, endorsements drying up, and whispers of a leadership challenge circulated. Each day she remained silent, the speculation grew louder. Pundits began to say openly what many had thought privately: Crockett's rise was accelerating, while Bondi's career was collapsing under the weight of one viral moment. The balance of power had shifted permanently. Under relentless pressure, Pam Bondi finally attempted to reclaim the narrative. Her team hastily arranged a press conference, hoping to show strength and push back against the tidal wave of criticism. Cameras lined up, reporters filled the room, and the nation tuned in to see if she could salvage her image. But from the moment Bondi stepped to the podium, the damage was obvious. Her voice trembled slightly as she read from a prepared statement, denouncing the hearing as biased and calling Crockett's actions political theater. Reporters, however, weren't buying it. The first question cut through like a knife. "Ms. Bondi, if those documents were false, why did you leave instead of staying to refute them?" Bondi hesitated, fumbling through an answer about unfair treatment and hostile conditions. But the follow-up was sharper. Representative Crockett didn't raise her voice, she presented signed evidence. "Are you disputing those signatures?" The room fell silent as Bondi stumbled, avoiding the question altogether. Clips of her faltering response went viral within minutes, with headlines like "Bondi dodges again" and "Evasion on repeat." Meanwhile, Crockett's reaction was calm and understated. When asked for comment, she replied, "I don't need to respond to press conferences. The documents already said everything." Her restraint once again made Bondi look defensive and desperate. By evening, analysts agreed, the press conference had only deepened the crisis. Instead of shifting the spotlight, Bondi had reinforced the very image she wanted to escape: someone running, dodging, and deflecting, while Crockett stood firm. What was meant to be a reset became another blow, sealing Bondi further into the narrative she couldn't outrun. While Bondi's press conference unraveled in real time, Jasmine Crockett's influence only grew stronger. National outlets no longer framed her as a fresh face in politics, they now called her a defining force. Editorial boards praised her composure, while commentators suggested she had shifted the tone of congressional hearings altogether. In Washington, Crockett began receiving invitations to keynote major events, from policy forums to national conventions. Colleagues sought her out for partnerships, knowing that her credibility had skyrocketed. What she had achieved in that single hearing was rare: she had broken through the noise of politics and captured the nation's attention. Bondi, on the other hand, couldn't escape the shadow of the walkout. Each attempt to pivot fell flat, overshadowed by memes, headlines, and Crockett's rising presence. Even within her own ranks, frustration boiled over. One insider admitted on background, the press conference was supposed to save her, but it just confirmed the worst fears: she has no defense. Meanwhile, Crockett continued to hammer on the broader message. "This isn't about one person," she told a packed audience at a town hall. "It's about accountability, no matter how powerful you are. Walking away doesn't erase the truth." The crowd erupted in applause, her words echoing across social media within hours. That speech was replayed on national television alongside the infamous clip of Bondi storming out. Together, they told a story that no strategist could rewrite: Crockett standing firm while Bondi ran. As polls showed Crockett's approval climbing and Bondi's sinking, one question started surfacing in political circles: was this just a viral moment, or the launch pad for Crockett's next chapter on the national stage? The saga reached its inevitable conclusion when even Bondi's closest allies admitted defeat. Quietly, behind closed doors, they urged her to step away from the spotlight before the humiliation grew irreversible. Days later, she released a brief statement announcing she would be taking time to reflect and regroup. It was the closest thing to an admission that the fight was over. For Pam Bondi, the viral walkout had become her legacy, an unshakable image of retreat when confronted with the truth. No press release, no spin, no staged press conference could erase it. For Jasmine Crockett, however, the moment was transformative. She had turned a single binder of documents into a national symbol of accountability. She hadn't raised her voice, she hadn't staged theatrics, she simply let the facts speak louder than politics. That calm, unwavering approach earned her not just victory in the hearing, but admiration across the country. Commentators declared it the moment Crockett arrived on the national stage. Editorials wrote that her steady hand had set a new standard for congressional integrity. Polls confirmed what was already clear: the public trusted her, respected her, and wanted more leaders like her. Clips of the confrontation continued to circulate months later, cemented into political history. Students studied it in classrooms, activists quoted it at rallies, and ordinary citizens shared it as proof that truth could still triumph in Washington. In the end, the story wasn't just about a walkout. It was about the undeniable force of facts, the collapse of evasion, and the rise of a voice that refused to be silenced. Jasmine Crockett had entered the hearing as one voice among many, but she left it as a figure who defined the day, reshaped the narrative, and proved that when truth is laid bare, it doesn't need to run. It stays seated.